Hello and welcome to yet another lecture number 38, and this is part of the contest between Western medical system and indigenous system. And one of the ways in which indigenous systems reacted and resisted hegemony by the Western system was by professionalizing some of their own practices. So, making their field more professional. And so, when you say professional, so that term itself indicates Western influence. And in any case, much of the process involved borrowing from the Western system. So, not only the idea, the concept of being professional or making the field a professional or seeing this as a profession in the modern sense. So, apart from that, as we will see, so there are a lot of things from marketing and other forms of standardization, which are very liberally followed from the Western system, even as the fight was against that very system. So, one of the ways of making the systems was by starting with the text. So, to make the textual contents very tight, so which could be done by eradicating what were seen to be aberrations, corruptions from the original law, the original text, and also locating and editing newly what were considered to be the authentic texts. Then also translating them to English and other languages. So, all of these gave textual authority and made the works, major works, accessible to a wider audience. So, this is particularly to be highlighted, the question of textual authority, because this is also one of the important aspects of what we call modernity or the modern period, with the coming of printing press, which is held to be one of the central pillars of modernity. So, which made knowledge more democratic, taking what was earlier only available to those who had access to manuscripts, manuscript written by hand, and therefore only limited copies. So, that limitation was transcended by the coming of the printing press. So, that is one thing. So, being able to print multiple copies to circulate at a reasonable cost, and also to be able to take it again beyond a certain kind of people, that is beyond the people who knew that particular language, say for instance Latin or Sanskrit. So, in this case translating for instance Sanskrit works to English or to other vernaculars, and so this gives an element of standardization. But of course, we have to bear in mind, just because there is a possibility of proliferating the text easily, so the same opportunity can also be available to false text, wrong text. So, we all see that in the social media today, where proliferation has become phenomenal, and all kinds of things can proliferate. So, not only good things. So, in fact, one suspects like social media is used more for spreading misinformation than actual information or half-cooked information, unchecked information. So, while we talk about the power of media, like the print media, and the power of multiplication and the power of democratizing. So, democratizing can also have its problems, but here on the other hand, it's what we are talking here is about the other more positive use that it has. So, things are properly tightened, and at the same time being made available to wider people, wider population. And so, therefore, to do all these, we need the kind of right kind of institutions, and then once they are tightened, so the proper kind of institutions again for instruction. So, for instance, the All India Ayurvedic Vidyapat was established in 1907 basically for these kinds of purposes. its courses in the Vidyapith, which is of course where you learn. So its courses had canonized Sanskrit Ayurvedic literature text alone as a legitimate corpus, and so weeding off whatever it thought was aberrations or corruptions, and not only in terms of texts, in terms of practical validity too. So it was argued that for instance, the value of Ayurvedic drugs had been established empirically by being tried and tested for over many centuries. But at the same time, so that is one kind of empiricism that has worked for so many centuries, but they were also open to modern lab-oriented methods of validation and standardization. So in doing that, so indirectly they are also yielding to the authority acquired by Western medical techniques. So you're surrendering to that kind of an yardstick. So rather than projecting your validity on your own terms, but anyway, because it served the purpose of tightening, because it would add value and legitimation. So the tightening of this entire enterprise of drug production and all the practical aspects, as in the case of text. So this will be discussed in detail in a special lecture on standardization and commercialization. So the idea was to overcome the habits of the Vaids, the practitioners of Ayurveda, to rely on improper methods or improper knowledge, or using illiterate apothecaries people to prepare the drugs. Such methods and habits not only rendered the medicines ineffective, not having the desired efficacy, but it also eroded the trust of the users, and it could also earn the ridicule of the critics. See, these are the kinds of medicines they have, of which we can't be too sure, or producing all kinds of unexpected results. So all of which can happen if the methods are improper, or people employed are not up to the mark. So eminent practitioners of Ayurveda like P.S. Warrior, of Kottakkal fame, about which we will be talking about in a while. So people like him held that Ayurveda had to move out of the old ruts. It has to adopt modern techniques, but at the same time without being detrimental, these changes, reforms being detrimental to the inherent qualities of Ayurveda. So all this has to be done if the popularity has to be regained. So people like him were in favor of the practitioners preparing medicines themselves according to proper methods. So they should be well instructed themselves, and so based on that they should be making, and they should also give proper attention to standards and strict Ayurvedic principles. And the manufacturing, storing, marketing, so all those things also they were ready to borrow from the models of Western pharmaceutical methods. So on the one hand, so he was insisting that people like him were insisting that there should be proper attention to the texts and to past good traditions, but at the same time they're open to these things. So he said that it was time to transcend misgivings about olden day practitioners not having followed such methods. So we can't keep on saying, oh, our ancestors, they didn't do it, so how can we do it? So because they don't do these kinds of mass manufacture and stocking and sale, so that's not the right argument. So we have to move according to the changing times wherever possible and wherever needed, and at the same time also seeing to it that the basic essence is not compromised. And people like him were also open to following the Western systems of hospital dispensaries, institutional forms, and forms of bureaucratic forms of management. So the fruits of all this were visible. The first, for instance, the first Ayurvedic dispensary in Calcutta was opened in 1878 by Kaviraj Chandra Kishore Sen. In the south, the earliest Ayurvedic dispensary was opened in 1898 by Pandit Gopalacharlu, who was a Telugu-speaking Baid. Telugu is one of the languages spoken in southern India. And with the coming of diarchy and devolution in 1919, so there were dispensaries for Ayurveda and Unani and homeopathy, which were supported by the provincial governments and municipal councils. So, as we saw, the Government of India Act of 1919 gave some measure of some leeway to Indian ministers, so who could influence policies in some small ways like this. And an important place has to be given to the role of the press in all of these things. So, for instance, newspaper advertisements, articles, and tracts, and also medical journals. So, because of the presence of these avenues, the literate public could directly come into contact with extracts from Sanskrit texts and be quite familiar with the availabilities of indigenous remedies and medicaments. So the newspapers and periodicals also highlighted the shortcomings of Western medicine. So, for instance, its failures in dealing with epidemics and the kinds of problems that their dealings with epidemics created. They also spoke about the cultural unsuitability of Western medicine, or rather how, on the contrary, indigenous medicine were culturally and even climatically more suited. They talked about the greater cost involved in Western medicine, which substantial parts of it having to be imported. So, these kinds of issues were highlighted by the press and public opinion. And interestingly, this had impact on Indian practitioners of Western medicine, and now that the revitalization movement was in full flow and a lot of tightening was happening, and some of the products were available more freely in the market, produced through new methods, near industrial mode of production, and also knowledge about it available. So, these practitioners were already trained and used to training and reading books and already having some form of degree or diploma. So, they saw the new opportunities opening up through revived indigenous systems as another extra as avenue for making extra money. And also there are other reasons for them to do so, because as we have seen in a couple of other lectures, so they were there was a question of lack of status in the state system, some inbuilt racism, and also the kind of income they were getting. So, that's why this promised to be another extra source of income. So, they very eagerly took up to indigenous systems and creatively integrated the best of their formal training in Western medicine, and also whatever they were able to learn, acquire through the benefits of the printing press and the availability of texts in whatever language they could understand in English, which they were, many of them would have been quite used to as part of their training in Western medicine, or texts in their local language. So, so they could tread in both the spheres. Now, coming to the revival movement as such, so as I said, one of the outstanding examples is that of P.S. Warrior, who started the Kottakkal movement in Kerala. So, he started the Kottakkal Arya Vaidya Shala, its aim was to establish Ayurveda as a popular form of medicine, as well as being presented as a culturally more appropriate form of medicine as compared to Western medicine. And another important aim of the movement was to fight and root out all ignorant and superstitious folk practices. So, we see here again the play of a kind of sub-hegemony. So, even as the Western system and practitioners of Western system were talking about indigenous systems and practitioners as quacks and the need for eradicating quackery. So, these reformers were in turn talking about other kinds of systems which were not very textual, the kinds of folk and traditional tribal practices they felt have to be rooted out. Warrior, something about some details about him. He was born in 1869 and he studied Ayurveda for 4 years under very qualified and eminent practitioner, Vaid. He also was exposed to Western medicine. He learned the English language also, and in fact, he learned it straight from a practitioner of Western medicine, a surgeon. So he started practice in the Kottakkal town, which is actually in the Malabar region, which was under the direct rule, British rule, as part of the Madras presidency. He launched the Arya Vaidya Samajam in 1902. So this so after this he came up with a clear roadmap for the revival of Ayurveda, Ayurvedic medicine. So that was the manifesto. So following his own advocacy of coming out of olden day limitation or rut as he called, and all the old practices, and his own call to embrace modern methods, he set his own Ayurvedic pharmaceutical company called the Kottakkal Arya Vaidya Shala, which continues to this day, and so many of you in your towns would have come across this pharmacy. So from those days and to this day, it's been commercially very vibrant. And though it was the main focus was on medicine and reviving and this particular form of medicine, Ayurveda. So all of it was actually placed within a larger frame, a broader cultural plane. So he himself, for instance, was very intimately involved in promoting Malayali language, that is Malayalam, which is the local language and spoken now mostly in the Kerala state of present India. So he played a very important role in promoting Malayalam and promoting drama. He launched a journal in Malayalam called Dhanvantari. So which is related to medicine, but the magazine, the journal also carried things beyond medicine. So of course, it was an important vehicle for propagating the ideals and spirit of the movement that he had started, and it also gave regular updated details about the various kinds of medicaments and drugs available. And he also worked towards the production of medical texts in Malayalam for reaching out to the common people. So apart from what was appearing in the periodical the journal, so he also produced from time to time specific books in Malayalam. So some of the translations from Sanskrit and other languages, so that common folk could get into touch with the system. And the fruits of the revitalization and professionalizing trends were seen in different forms in different other places as well. So, for instance, the All India Ayurvedic Ayurveda, or it's also called the Vedic All India Vedic and Unani TB conference, so which was spearheaded by Hakim Ajmal Khan, or the Ayurveda Vidyapith at Nashik, which was named after Gaekwad Sri Sayajirao Maharaj, the princely ruler, the princely state. So this was established in 1906 under the patronage of Maharaja of Darbhanga, Sri Rameshwar Singh Nikal. That's another princely state. And from beyond these organizations and people directly related to the concerned indigenous fields of medicine. So there are also other people and organizations which came, including the leading nationalist organization, which was Indian National Congress, so which supported the revitalization movements and served as a political platform to the Vaidyas and Hakims. And the Muslim League, which is another party, supported the All India Vedic Unani TB Association. Vaidya Sammelans or conferences were held from time to time, and these in fact helped create Esprit the Corps and networks. At the beginning of the course, we were talking about Esprit the Corps in the context of IMS, how IMS was not only one of the earliest services, but among the great benefits it gave, at least to the British. So one was the sense of team spirit, that sense of corporate belongingness, especially being so far away from home and also sometimes being looked down upon by their own metropolitan colleagues back home. So similarly here in the context of the assault and constant challenges and criticisms, marginalization from the colonial state and the Western system of medicine. So there was the need not only for individuals like Ajmal Khan or Warrior to operate in their own silos. So there was that enormous need for all of them to come and to have that sense of corporate belonging, that network. So these kinds of conferences help to create that, and of course there was the formation of idea corporate bodies, which also in fact led to forms of professional worship. So these are all cultural elements which bring that cohesiveness. So Dhanvantari, the deity, was projected as a common symbol, as a professional deity for the Ayurvedic practitioners. So in honor of that deity, there was a celebration of Dhanvantari Divas and other kinds of festivities associated with the deity, and also with common set formulas of worship which all the practitioners would follow. And then there was the annual celebration of Dhanvantari Janmotsav, which interestingly, so it was not just a cultural cohesiveness, but the particular relevant things also came to the fore there. So this celebrations had exhibitions where Ayurvedic medicines, herbal medicaments, and books, translated books, and what are other pamphlets related to Ayurveda were displayed. So thus you see how this whole thing is not just about, on the one hand it's about professionalization, about standardization, but you also see how cultural religious elements which normally would act would go counter to that desire to professionalization, but here quite interestingly we see how even those benefits, cultural idioms and symbols are also summoned to actually contribute to this professionalization. And again, the parts of professionalization included institution of professional titles, like for instance, practitioners of Western medicine carried title like doctor so and so. So similarly here some Vaids called themselves Professor Kaviraj Pandit so and so, excuse me, Ayurveda Acharya. And the the Sammelans Conference and the other corporate bodies of the Vaids. So, they conferred sanction status and legitimacy to the practitioners. So, titles were given, honorifics and awards for distinctions were given during this Sammelans in the presence of so many other practitioners and also in front of the lay public. So, later in the 1930s and after, the government of India, so which now had more and more Indian presence. So, for instance, the 1935 Act gave provincial autonomy. So, there were ministries formed by the Congress and Muslim League. So, in that context, so such governments also honored Vaidyas with grand titles for their services. So, one of the important challenges on this path of professionalization was tackling quackery. So, in the name of indigenous medicine. So, there are several people who were using this movement also to peddle their own practices and materials which are of dubious nature. So, on the one hand, Western doctors and Indian doctors with training in Western medicine, so increasingly called Vaidyas and Hakims as quack, especially now they were seen as competitors challenging the monopoly they held. On the other hand, indigenous practitioners reacted to this kind of characterization and more vehemently raised their voices in the context of the revitalization movement and the process of professionalization. So, here again the local press came in support. So, particularly vernacular print media eagerly provided space for the Baidyas and Hakims through their columns, and some of the newspapers or periodicals expose the actual cases of quackery. So, very evident cases. So, for instance, students who had failed their courses in medical colleges, so they wouldn't reveal that they had failed, but people would know that they have gone to college, but they wouldn't know what was the result. So, but they'd use that association, the fact that they went to college, to come and practice and do all kinds of fake work. So, the revitalization movements basically sought to squeeze out such and other kinds of unscientific practitioners. So, one of the things they felt very sorely was the lack of institutional setup in the indigenous systems to distinguish between so who they considered as properly trained Vaidyas and these kinds of quacks. So, one of the things they blamed was the lack of uniform curriculum and registration methods. Whereas, on the one hand, as far as practitioners of Western medicine is concerned, so their qualification was quite easily verifiable because they had standard degree certificates which are awarded by standard institutes after a standard and uniform course of training, and they had standard examinations which they passed. So, what was lacking here in the case of indigenous systems was that kind of standard procedures or examining bodies, but having them would involve enormous efforts. So, as it is, they had to spend a lot of energy coming together, translating and weeding out and rewarding and other such things. And of course, they tried their best to build that esprit de corps, the network and all that, but this was something which just this kind of association and their bodies alone would not be able to do. This definitely needed considerable state involvement, which of course is a whole problem now. That's what they are fighting. So, and this is of course something which is of relevance even today, especially in the context of many private efforts taken by well-meaning bodies and all that. At the end of the day, for some of these things, especially in matters of standardization, though some measure of self-regulation is possible, but the final stamp, that authority come only if it has that state support, which we will see is in this case also, as we would cover a little more about their struggles in a couple of other lectures. But we will close this one here. Thank you.